Basically, I was walking home from work at 3 p.m. yesterday. It was warm and sunny and felt really summery. I decided to walk down a public footpath through some fields behind my house to get home. The footpath I chose happened to be one my granddad told me we don't walk down. Obviously, I always thought he was joking, as that's why he was like. Anyway, the first field was beautiful knee-high grass. You could see and hear loads of birds and bugs, and could hear sheep in the distance. It was really peaceful and felt lovely. The second field was the same. Then I crossed a bridle-way path to get into the third field. This is where it got creepy. To get to the footpath into the woods I was following, you would have to walk down behind a huge bramble/weed thicket. I was walking and everything felt fine and nice, until I was about to turn the corner to go around the thicket, and then everything went silent. And I mean everything. The wind stopped rustling the trees, the sheep stopped, even moving their ears, went up and they looked terrified. The birds stopped, as did the bugs. It literally felt as if someone had pressed pause on the audio. I never felt so much fear in all my life. I looked around to see if I could see anyone else or any predators, like a fox or dog, as I'm from the UK. That's the worst we get. I even checked the skies for a buzzard, but there was nothing. Not even a bird or fly in the sky. I turned around slowly and walked up to the sheep to get a better view of the field, and they didn't even move, they just sat there still. I then walked back the bridle way and slowly walked down their way to my local town. I wanted to run. Everything in my body was telling me to run, but my head told me to just walk slowly and everything would be okay. Once I was halfway down the bridle way, the sound all started again, although I was still terrified. My question was, why did that happen? What happened? And what caused it? This was yesterday, and I'm still quite shaken up now. I can't look out of my window at that field. If you go through 3 or 4 other fields, it's joined up to a small alleyway down the back of my home. The council are planning on building on a few fields, including this one. I'll say I'm from southeast England, and I've never really had a problem with the fields around here. I've always felt very at home and peaceful. When I was in my early 20s, I experienced a supernatural event that to this day has left me shaken to my core and believing we are truly not alone in this universe. This occurred during the early 2010s at late night. I was living with a relative along the eastern coast of North Carolina at the time. I was going to college. I'd been playing Call of Duty Black Ops with a few friends online. I was starting to get a little tired, but remembered I had been asked to go out and pick up some milk. I knew that the local Harris Teeter grocery stores were open 24/7, so leaving my house at 1 a.m. to grab milk was a non-issue. I grabbed my keys and wallet before throwing on my shoes and stepping out onto the front porch. To give some context, my relatives lived in a cul-de-sac. It was about 150 feet of pavement from the circle to the adjoining road. At the beginning of the circle, there was a street lamp that glowed a pale orange. Beneath this lamp lining one of the neighbours' property were large palm trees. Specifically, these were sago palms that were roughly 5 feet high, practically a massive bush. From the front porch, you can see the streetlight and palms without turning your head much to the right. With that being said, I stepped out onto the porch that fateful night and came to a halt. Something compelled me to stop. I was suddenly filled with a paralyzing fear I'd never experienced before and haven't since. I was quite literally frozen in place, not even 2 steps out the door. I only stood there for maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like ages. I looked over to the street lamp where the palm stood and didn't see anything at first. Suddenly, from behind the closest palm to the lamp, sprung a tall creature. I only saw a quick glimpse of it, but it fled off into the darkness and out of view. I heard it give a cry that sounded like a raccoon chittering and a pig squealing at the same time. Just as quickly as this creature had appeared, it had disappeared without a trace. I have a friend who is a huge supernatural believer, and you can bet he was the first person I had called after this event. One of his first questions was, "What did it look like?" And I told him this. The creature was just slightly taller than the palm it hid behind. It was a pale white humanoid, but it was missing a head. It was too thin and gangly to have been a human or ape of any kind, but it also seemed to be covered in light hair. There was, however, one single thing that I couldn't get my mind off of. Even to this day, it sends chills down my spine and causes my hands to tremble. When I was standing on that porch, when I felt that fear take hold of me, there was one other feeling I had when I finally looked over. I was about to die. Whatever that creature was, its intent was hostile. I'm truly convinced to this day that the thing wanted to harm me. Something saved me that night from walking blatantly into the dark. I don't know if it was instinct or some unknown force, but I'll never forget my first and only encounter with the creature of North Carolina. When I was a teenager, me and my friend used to hang out at a popular mall by where she lived. We were walking from one end of the mall to the other to meet with some friends. While we were walking there was another group of teenagers in front of us walking really slow and just being in the way. My friend didn't really notice because she was on her phone, but I was looking for a break in the crowd to get around them. While I was looking, I saw this dude and instantly he shocked me. He was walking really weird, like shuffling forward, which is why I looked at him directly in the first place. But he looked like he didn't fit in his skin. Like it looked a little loose and it kind of hung off him. His face looked like High Five Ghost from Regular Show, honestly. 2 black circles for eyes, a large open frown, and no nose. When I say black, I mean Vanta black. It looked like someone cut out paper shapes and put them on his saggy face skin. There was no depth or really anything behind it. He had shoulder-length, dirty, greasy black hair and was wearing a tan suit that also looked too big for him to be wearing. At first, I thought the dude may have a disability, so I tried not to stare. But his face honestly scared me, and I had to look at him more. No one else around seemed to be shocked at him like I was. I watched him walk by and asked my friend if she saw it. She said no. But a girl in the group in front of us whipped around to her friend and yelled, "Did you just see that?" Just as panicked as I felt. Her friend said no, and my friend and I walked past them to meet our friends. I think about this event a lot because it doesn't make sense to me. Other people have commented that it may have been a burn victim, but there was nothing behind his face holes. You can see depth when people have holes in them. Also, he had no eyeballs, so he must have been blind, but he had no guide assistants with him. Before I get into my story, I first would like to provide you with some background information that contributes. I'm a Native American, and in my culture, we have many myths, legends, and folklores. One example of folklore in my culture is the skinwalker. For those that don't know, a skinwalker can take the form of various creatures. However, they will always be slightly different, like a cat with dog fur or a cat with cat's ears and human eyes. I've been told stories passed down for generations. As I began telling my story, this is on a first-hand account and everything that is being said is true. Now with that being said, let's get started. When I was younger, my little brother and I noticed an owl was following us around. We had noticed that this owl was not a regular-sized owl. The owl was roughly around 5 feet tall. We also noticed that it would linger around us and watch us. We considered this to be normal. We never showed any form of fear or anything to that extent. My brother and I began to develop the belief that this owl was a form of protector. Our mum had mentioned that the owl had arrived around the time we were born and began to follow us everywhere we went. When we were younger, we lived on a farm. Any time we would throughout the land, the owl would be around us. Our mum had also told us about how the same owl would sit on the stop sign at the end of the road if we had gone somewhere. When we would get closer to our house, the owl would follow the car back to our property. When we turned 13 years old, I noticed that the owl had stopped coming around the house or following us. When I was 16, I ended up getting into a huge argument with my dad, and I ended up staying at my mom's house for a good while. One night I had returned to my dad's house. It was my first time being at either house in months. As nighttime began to rise, I noticed the same owl was at the house. Around 3 a.m, I heard the owl outside. I went to check and saw the owl. I waved to the owl and began walking to my grandpa's house. During this time, the bathroom in my parents' house was being worked on, so we had to go to my grandpa's house to use the restroom. As I started walking towards my grandpa's house, the owl began to follow me towards his house. In between the houses, there's a good amount of land, roughly the length of a football field. As I continued walking to my grandpa's house with my dog, I noticed that the owl was alarmed and began hooting frantically. I looked up at the owl to see where it was, and then I looked down to see if there was anything around the area. As I was doing so, I heard movement in a brush in another field, the same field where the cows were located. I soon began to see a big black mass. The mass was roughly about 2 feet bigger than a Shetland pony. My dog had noticed it and began to growl and run. As I was walking towards the gate, I saw a normal-sized black dog that wasn't supposed to be there. The dog then began to run towards the stables where my dog ran. After the dog ran away, I continued to walk towards my grandpa's house to use the bathroom. When I was finished, I'd gone back outside and noticed my dog was standing on my grandpa's porch, visibly scared and shaking. I patted her to make sure she was okay and calmed her down. When she was calm enough, we began walking back to my parents' house. As we were doing so, I heard a noise behind my grandpa's truck, which was roughly 20 feet away from the porch. I had pulled out my knife that I would use as a form of self-defense as I ever got attacked by an animal. I walked off the porch and approached the truck. As I approached the truck, I noticed a creature standing about 5 feet away from me. The creature looked somewhat like a dog, but it wasn't a dog. I had then remembered that it was the same figure that I saw in the field earlier. After coming out of the stage of shock, I realized that I'm standing 5 feet away from a medium horse-sized creature, holding a knife while it's staring me down, growling. One of the first things I noticed was its front paws, but they didn't look like normal paws. They were elongated and had similarly looked like fingers, and they were more spread out than a dog's paw. I had then noticed that its head slowly began to come out of the darkness. I had noticed its eyes, some brown but also whiter around the eye. It then begins to move closer to me. The legs were shaped similarly to a dog's legs. However, the creature's legs were more muscular, like a human. I immediately reacted by throwing the knife at its paw. The creature had barely moved its paw fast enough to not get hit. I then hear the owl screech out loud and the dog looks at me. I'm closing the distance between me and the creature. It then looks up as the owl begins to fly above me and the dog. I had noticed that the creature was distracted by the owl. I had taken this opportunity to grab the knife, and I made an attempt to stab the creature. The creature jumps back to avoid the knife, turns, and runs back towards the field. I can hear the owl flying back towards the field where the creature had run back to. I slowly and cautiously make my way back towards my parents' house. As I approach the gate from the field and into the yard, I hear a yelp and a loud thud followed by a screech. I looked up and saw the owl fly from the cow field towards a tree sitting in the yard of my dad's house. When the owl had landed, it looked at the owl and it had looked at me and began to hoot. As the owl did so, I ended up getting a feeling that the owl was telling me to go inside and that everything was going to be okay. The next morning, I woke up and went out to the field where the creature came from. I found a large patch of the brush that was flattened, but there was no blood or carcass from the creature that had tried to attack me. I had also noticed that the owl was not around the property. I'm now 22 years old and haven't seen the owl or the creature since that night. My dad is still located on the same property that I grew up on, and I do visit frequently. After that night, I don't know what happened to the owl. But one thing that I do know, this event did occur. I fully believe that I encountered a skinwalker. I also believe that the owl was there to protect me one last time. I don't know what to think about this story, and I've never shared it because I never thought anyone would actually listen or believe me. So what better place to tell it than here? This encounter occurred last Halloween, during the blue moon. I'm still not quite sure what to make of it. To give some background information, I consider myself a spiritual individual. I grew up Christian, but as I entered adulthood, began to expand my perspective, and now consider myself, for lack of better words, spiritual. I believe in a higher power. I believe in the universe, fate, etc. However, I don't necessarily assign to any religion. I was born on the 13th. 13 has been my lucky number my entire life, despite certain superstitions surrounding the number. Last October, when I was in really started to open my heart to spirituality and began to explore that realm. However, as most people experience when navigating their spirituality, I still had doubts and wasn't fully convinced. That Halloween night, my sister and her friends had dressed up and asked me to take pictures of them in their costumes at the park by my house. I left my house at the very end of sunset, and very quickly the sun completely set and it was dark out. I took pictures of my sister and her friends all around the park. This is where the encounter happened. We were just kind of standing around in an area and we just so happened to stop in. Her friends were talking and I suddenly, in the dimly lit park, felt the urge to look down. When I did just that, I saw an orange ball hidden in the grass. I picked it up and inspected it and found that it was a miniature orange pool ball with the number 13 on it. About the size of a medium-sized marble. I was shocked to say the least. What are the chances that I so happened to feel the urge to look down, in the dark at night, and find a ball with my lucky number on it? And guess what? That's not even the craziest part. After I had fully wrapped my head around what I just found, I told my sister and her friends, who were also shocked and a little bit freaked out. Something about this ball felt familiar. After racking my brain a little bit, I remembered something. My dad, who's a firefighter, once brought home a pool ball with the number 13 on it for me when I was about 8 or 9 years old. He found the ball in a house fire. I'm not sure the circumstances of why he took it or where he found it, and after asking him, he doesn't recall ever giving it to me. I went home with the ball I found in the park, tore my room apart, and eventually found the ball my dad had given to me. The only difference between the two balls is that the one my dad gave me was a full-sized pool ball, while the other was a smaller version. I always took this as a sign of some sort. I'm not sure exactly what it meant or why it happened, or even if it has any significance at all, but it served as a comfort for me when I was in a rough patch. I keep both of the balls with me, and they're very special to me. I'd love to hear what you all think of this. So this starts off with my friend having a job, working for our county maintenance, cleaning bathrooms, and doing things around the county. He has an assigned bathroom to clean and maintain. He's been with this job for over a year now and constantly checks up on this bathroom. It's in a public park with lots of people around. Keep in mind that he cleans these every day. There's a little house above the park bathrooms across the road. It's abandoned and kind of overgrown. He's never seen anybody going in or out of there. Until one day he looked up and saw a cloaked figure walking into a doorway, leading into a side building of the house. This door has always been closed in all of our years living there. It was open and the man just went inside. Nothing too crazy, but after work my friend decided to drive by to see what was in that room. It was just a small room with two longer chairs facing each other. Very weird. But my friend thought it was just a weird coincidence that it happened, until he saw this man constantly going into that room every day, after that, at the same exact time in the morning, around 6:30. My friend became more curious. He'd watch him to see what he does and get closer to him with the car, being as close to 10 yards away from him in the truck, and the man wouldn't move or turn around, just stare into the room from the outside. He would see different types of actions from this man, sometimes being real fast and determined and go into the room, and others very slowly, and at times just weirdly staring into the room for hours, no movement. My friend then decided to tell me and his brother about it one night cruising. This is where I get all the information. We go by it one night, very cautious since the door was closed and the past few days it was open. Me being a mess around person honking the horn in front, we pull away, and my friend goes in the next morning, doing this thing about to head into his bathroom. And he saw the mysterious man at the house kind of wait for my friend to see him, and then walked in and slammed the door extremely hard. This spooked my friend out and he got his job done and left. The same occurrences kept happening, and the day after the door slam is when my friend drove by and got the pictures of him, showing that he is very tall, even hunched over, in the position of staring like he normally does. After a few days of talking about the mysterious man and making up scenarios, my friend goes to clean his bathroom. He sees the cloaked man standing at the bathroom door, staring at the door. Nothing else. Being worried, my friend calls the cops. While waiting, he watched the man walk away slowly, very slowly. Once he got behind a tree and out of sight, he just disappeared. Cops couldn't find him and it was a lost cause. That's when my friend brought up the Grim Reaper idea. After seeing him a couple of days later, the man was never to be seen again. And my friend said a family member had just died the day that he stopped seeing the cloaked man. He now doesn't see him and the house is getting cleaned out slowly. Can someone please explain? What do you think it is? We're so eager to find out what this thing was. About 30 minutes ago, I was out with my friend and his older brother. We always seek out scary encounters, and there's this hike that always gives off bad vibes at night. We were set to head out there. We got out there and went through the trail and off the trail. Never felt nothing too worrisome. We headed out to the mine shaft where water trails out from runoff. We sat there and I never felt the bad vibes. Small steps next to me, but felt like it was in my mind. Until my friend felt something tug his pocket. We decided to get up and go until we heard a rock rolling behind us and started sprinting away in fear. 2 of us fell, but we got up and hurried away. We headed to the car and for some reason, we didn't get in or even speak about keeping on. But we just walked by and we knew this trailhead a little farther down the road. And mid-walk, I pointed out that we didn't even speak about going to this trailhead. It felt like something was calling us. We got to the trail and moved 30 yards in, and my friend pointed out a curved tree. I remembered the native stories about them bending trees for water and trail markers. I started telling them about it, and keep in mind this trail is called Native Lake and leads to a smaller lake. When I was telling them about the natives bending trees, the tree that is right next to it started to creak. No wind blowing. We noticed this and for some reason stayed right next to it. And once I was done talking about the natives, wood cracking started occurring in certain spots. There was a small grass patch and it sounded like something was taking small steps. And as these things were occurring, the tree had started creaking louder and louder. More footsteps and branches breaking. My friend turned the flashlight and saw a shadow man on the edge of his light range. We then started to feel worse vibes and decided to walk out. As we were walking, you could hear things moving in the bushes. And right before the exit, the sound of a rock being kicked across the floor occurred right in front of us, but no rock was there. We backed up and then hurried out. Throughout his time, our eyes were watering and chills constantly running through our bodies. I want to know if something could be trapped in that tree, or if something was pulling us in with that tree to toy with us. Growing up in a small mountain town, my friend group and I had our fair share of scary encounters, making ghost hunting our hangout hobby. We would constantly seek out new places and new experiences, and we always found high energy in our town. Our background of ghost hunting had ranges of experiences that involved spirits, skinwalkers, and other unknown things. One day, I get a random text from my friend saying he thinks something satanic is happening at this tunnel. I didn't know what he was talking about. I've never been to this so called tunnel. He explained to me it was on the outskirts of town by the ski resort. It finally clicked. I used to drive by it all the time and get an eerie feeling from it. This tunnel was used for train transportation until the train stopped running through those tracks. My friend and his brother were the ones that had went out to check it out. He had then sent photos of a deer head hanging from a wire with candles in its eye sockets and candles around it. Of course, we had to make a trip out there again the next time we hung out. We walked through the tunnel, which felt longer than what it looked like. Nothing crazy happened, and we felt fine, so we left. We came back a different night, and something felt off from the beginning. We felt spooked by every little thing. It felt like something was watching us. We got out of the car and walked to the small building that had the deer head to see if anything weird was happening. Nothing at all. I had the main flashlight and my friends had their phone flashlights. The flashlight I was holding was way brighter and could see a lot further. With this in mind, my friend's brother had told me to shine the light at the tunnel because we were still a good 50 yards away from it. I did it slowly and a tan blob was sitting in the middle of the tunnel. It looked like a mountain lion but squished into a ball. We stared at it in awe, hoping that it wouldn't move. As I watched it, I saw it slowly moving from the middle of the tunnel to the right side. I pointed this out and no one believed me. They had thought it wasn't something alive. I kept pointing this out and finally they started to see it move too. As this was happening, you could see two eyes appear in the middle of the blob. We started backing away while facing it, until my brother's friends started running away. We all then started running, and my friend that was in the back saw it start to move after us. We ran straight to the car and jumped in. We had theories of it being a skinwalker that was just watching us, but not meaning harm or a witch that had some tan clothing on. But we never knew what it was. We head out a month or so later and stay in the car. While we're trying to listen, there was a loud noise that I felt in my feet. It sounded like a gunshot or like something had hit the train tracks with metal. Since then, we haven't gone back, but soon we'll know what is going on there. I've been in the US Navy for about a decade. I only hold a secret clearance, nothing special, basically just an in-depth background check. My job, while important, isn't something, to me, that turns any heads when it comes to glamour or spotlight. I've always been fascinated with the unknown, extraterrestrials in particular. At night, my eyes are always pointed up in hopes that I might catch a glimpse of something that I know exists. A few years ago at my previous duty station in the PNW, I went to bed like any normal night. Occasionally, I'd daydream about extraterrestrials and contact before I'd fall asleep. Well, on this night, I had a very vivid dream that to this day seemed too real to be just a dream. I woke up in an unknown location next to another sailor. This was before NWU Type 3s were required, wearing our blueberries. We were already standing, we're outdoors, but the lights at our location were so bright, it seemed like it was almost daylight. I turned to the other sailor and asked where we were. He explained that I had been hand-selected for a top-secret program for interstellar travel. I didn't believe him, and he could tell. He brought me into what looked like a missile silo holding what seemed to be a ship. Many other sailors were walking around and working, paying no attention to me. We walked up on an extremely tall woman, I'd say 7 feet at least. Her extremities were excessively long, to include her neck, and she had absolutely no hair. She was wearing a blue robe, or something like it, and she began speaking to me telepathically. Her cheekbones were really high and she had massive eyes that were a deep blue. She explained to me that if I accepted their offer, I would be unknown to the world. I'd have to leave my wife and kids. I would essentially cease to exist. The prize? Knowing everything I'd ever wanted to know about human history and our existence in the universe. I refused. I love my family. She gave a disappointed nod, and I woke up. It felt so real. I've never had a dream like that. Product of an overactive imagination? Maybe. Anyone else ever have this experience in the military? So this was in 2015 or 16. It was a Sunday night around 11:40, and my dad and I had just finished working on the family car, so things would go smoothly Monday. Did a double check, and everything was fine and running great. I go outside just to see the night sky and admire the moon because why not? I lean on the car and look straight up. At first, I saw something strange. A creature that's very high in the sky. I can tell since it's around the distance I see airplanes fly at. It was very high up and looked like a giant manta ray slowly flapping its wings, like it was in water. Gracefully, I might add. Then I realised there was a large group of them from behind, about 20 of them. I quickly called my dad, mom and sister. I told them to look in the sky and they were just telling me I'm crazy or just playing around. To their surprise, they all saw the creature that looked like a manta ray up in the night sky. We were staring at them for a good 3 minutes until they just flew higher and then just disappeared into the dark night sky. It was a strange experience we shared as a family, and we were just talking excitedly since this was my parents' first strange encounter. My sister and I had a paranormal experience when we were kids, but excited since this was our second. We talked about it at dinner, and we were just saying that there is a lot of mysterious things out there in the world. Apparently these things are called cryptids. I just wanted to share what I and my family experienced. So last night, I was taking my 5-year-old son to a trick-or-treat at church. There really isn't much to do in this town. We've been arguing about music. "Mommy, are murderers real?" he asked out of nowhere. "Yes, baby. Sometimes people kill other people." "Will I get murdered?" he asked sadly. "No, baby. It's my job to keep you safe." I thought this would be the end of it. It wasn't. "But what if you get shot in the belly?" he asked specifically. "Mommy's belly is pretty big. I'd have to go to the hospital, but I'd probably be fine." "But what if you were shot by the gun that's really a cannon and turns your belly to fire? You probably wouldn't be fine." We don't have those here." I thought that would be the end of it. "Mommy, do they have murderers in the desert?" he then asked. "Yes, they have murderers in the desert." "Oh," he got quiet. "The last time I got murdered, I was in the mountains high above the desert. I had a gun that was really a cannon, but it broke and fell apart. It just fell apart and I couldn't get it back together. That's when I got murdered. It would be sad if I got murdered again." Okay. I then turned on Lizzo, which is his favourite. He was pretty quiet for the rest of the ride. We live in the deep south, USA. He's never been to the desert. I have a very clear scene in my mind that I believe was a past life memory, most recent one. What I'm asking for is if any Chicago resident knows of a place like what I see in this scene. Could you hit me up with links to pictures? I've never actually been to Chicago or anywhere near in my life. The image I have is so vivid. I'd love to know if there's a real picture that matched it. Anyway, in my memory, I was a teenage boy walking with some friends. There's this food area, and it's like sloping cement sides and a flat bottom for floodwaters. There's a bridge over it that's supported by three round concrete columns, big fat things. On one side, at least the other side isn't clear because I wasn't paying attention, there's a path for walking up above. I clearly remember that there was a flood and some dude was stuck in the rising water. People formed a human chain, hand to hand, trying to pull the guy out. I was three people up from the person who had the rescue guy's hand. Person 4 and 5 lost their grip, so everyone from person 4 down got disconnected from the chain and swept into the water. I don't know what became of them. I remember being swept away into the water and feeling the power of it. I remember the way the water split and curled under itself where the concrete columns were. I felt the water pulling me in many directions at once, but most especially down as I got near the column. I remember being totally calm and thinking, this is where I die. And that was it. Does anyone from Chicago know of a place that looks like that? Or of a story of people dying in a flood like that? I'd love to know if this is a real past life memory, or just a very vivid dream I kept having and then remembering when I was awake. Forgot to say, I was born in 1976 this life, so it would have been some time before that. A few months back, I was sleeping cozily in my room when I woke up at around 2 or 3 in the morning to use the restroom. Naturally, I go to do that. However, once I get to the doorframe, I get an overwhelming, unbearable sense to look up. Once I do, there's this awful creature staring back at me. Its head looks like a large blob made up of a mash of several facial features, looking just over the top of the door with its hand on the edge of the door. The exact second that I lock eyes with this terrifying thing, I get a completely unbearable, just absolutely heavy feeling to book it out of there. Oddly enough, I didn't. Rather, I stood and watched it. A few seconds afterwards, the creature seemed to just fade away. I tell my parents about a week afterwards, and they just say it's just the light, even though the angles of the lights in my bedroom physically couldn't touch the bedroom, nor could they be moved to unless completely relocated. There was consistent supernatural events in that bathroom for a while afterwards. Random water turning on, shower turning on with no one in there, lights turning off randomly while people were in the shower. I was attempted to force the alleged spirit at the time out of the bathroom with a cross, as me and my family are highly Christian. However, someone found out, and my family has been giving me trouble every now and then about it. I have no idea if it's a spirit or a humanoid, or if it's even real and I'm just crazy. So I figure this is the best place. If anyone has any idea on what this is, I beg you to share. If anyone has a similar experience with a creature of the same build, please also share. So just a couple hours ago, me and my friend, we'll call him Matt, came back from a trip to Walmart. There's this pavement trail down by our neighbourhood park that we walk up to get to the shopping centre, because it's close and we've never brought more than we can carry when going on for fun shopping trips. Anyways, back on topic. We went back to the park and discussed random things about a show we watched, troubles, etc. We then hear these awfully eerie screams. But as we live in a neighbourhood with quite a few kids, we at first put it aside as it could just be kids fooling around. About 5 or 10 minutes later, we hear these screams of what you could attribute to utter disembowelment. I mean, like the kind of scream you'd hear when someone's been butchered in a horror movie. Even worse when I noticed they came from two different locations. Naturally, that horror movie instinct drove me to check it out. Foolish of me, I guess. Matt gets behind me as I check it out. I'm gripping a pocket knife close to me as I steadily walk towards the first scream location, near the front of our neighbourhood by some bushes and trees. I arrive about a foot away from a bush in front of me, and I'm hit with this complete and utter uneasiness that makes me feel sick. I mean, I'm going to vomit every organ out of my body sick. Comparable to that of the uneasiness mentioned in the post I tried to link above. All noise is quiet for about 2 seconds, until something charges at me from the bushes a few feet in front of me, way at the back of the scenery though. It was large enough to rustle the leaves on the trees and the entirety of the bushes, but it wouldn't have been human. It was quick as all hell, and it wasn't going to find out just how fast it could truly go, so me and Matt booked it the hell out of there. We make it far enough as the end of the park, and turn around where we see nothing. Matt tells me that the other scream was down by the basketball court in my neighbourhood, so me, being the idiot I am, went to check it out again. We arrive at the court and nothing's there. It's all quiet again. The problem with this particular location is that the general area of bushes that we were just chased out of was about 100 feet in front of us, making it clearly visible. There's an opening in the trees down there at the end, so I peer into it from my standpoint and see what looks like an inhumanly contorting arm with the colour of a decayed corpse-like brown show itself from that opening and quickly hide itself. Matt said that he saw the exact same thing when I asked him about it. Again, me being a dumb human being, I wanted to check it out, this time pulling out the pocket knife and putting the blade out in front of me. The same uneasiness I talked about comes back, this time worse and worse, to the point where my body feels numb. Yet I feel awful pain all throughout my body. I felt the presence of evil surround me. Again, I arrive about 2 feet from the opening when I hear a voice whisper my name in my ear. It was a raspy, distorted yet somewhat human sounding, like an animal trying to trick someone in a Disney movie. Yet the voice went through a million filters, and when heard, sounds evil and disturbing. It felt devilish and evil, and again, something charges at me from the opening, this time snarling and growling in that same voice that whispered to me. Note, Matt was about 50 feet behind me. Now wanting to live, I ran, and surpassed even Matt. The phrase in my head repeating, "In the name of God, leave me alone." Whatever was behind me kept charging, but eventually stopped seemingly right after the phrase repetition in my head stopped. I'm genuinely terrified. People tell me it could have been a coyote with mange or a fox. The problem is, I've heard a fox yell or scream, and the screams I heard sounded nothing like a fox, and also, it was too big to have been a coyote either. I'm concerned for me and my friend's safety. Also, if it helps, I live in Northern Virginia. My parents were out of town, and I lived in a small neighbourhood in upstate New York. My backyard was half cleared land and half dense woods. There was a small creek that ran behind my house too, so I could see all sorts of animals at night, including turkey, foxes, possums, raccoons, and deer. One night around 1 a.m, I was on the couch in the extended living room part of my home, where 3 of the walls had windows and we had a skylight. This is important, because I had a complete view of almost all of my backyard up to the tree's edge, including the moon overhead, which was a waning crescent. I heard the sound of a very angry squirrel for about 5 minutes, and I kind of brushed it off because I've heard angry squirrels before. Then I heard the most terrifying screech. It sounded like a goose I had just been murdered and screaming. It scared the crap out of me, and I immediately rushed over to the windows to see if I could see anything. I was worried it might have been a wolf, since my neighbour's cat likes to go wandering outside, and usually kills a bunny or two and leaves them in our front yard. It was pitch black, and my porch light barely illuminated anything but the porch. I brushed off the noise and went to bed shortly after. The next morning, I headed over to my neighbour's house who have hunted before, and occasionally would bow hunt too. I asked if they heard that noise last night, and they said yes. They thought it was a deer crying for help. They told me they were going to investigate the woods in a few hours to see what happened. I was reluctant to ask to go with, but I was determined to know what the noise had been. A few hours later, my neighbours and me went into the woods. We didn't have to go far when we saw a dead squirrel pretty much ripped to pieces. We continued on, figuring that squirrels don't have that much meat on them, so the animal probably tried to get as much as it could out of it. We wandered for about 5 more minutes when we came across 5 dead bunnies, a deer and her fawn, and a dead goose. Now this frightened me the most. 3 of the dead bunnies had just their heads missing and the body was intact. The other 2 were ripped to pieces, similar to the dead squirrel. I almost gagged at the smell of it all. I didn't dare walk towards the goose or the deer. My neighbour had had a bow on him walk towards the mother deer to see that she had long claw marks in her torso and her head had been mangled. The fawn, however, had its head missing as well. Now the weirdest part of all the dead animals was the goose. The goose was fully intact except that its lungs had been ripped open and all of its inner organs were gone. My neighbour's wife immediately called the police and said that there was a bear roaming the property and was attacking innocent animals. I had my suspicions, but I don't believe this was a bear. My neighbour, who had the bow, was keeping a clear eye on the surrounding woods, like he was watching for something. His wife paid no attention to this and continued to talk to the police. Then it hit me, a feeling of dread and chills. New York gets cold in the morning, but this was summer, and the humidity was usually around 90%. The entire woods seemed to be silent as well. We were near the creek and couldn't hear the water flowing either. I could see my neighbour had the same feeling wash over him as he raised his bow and loaded an arrow into it. He told his wife to be quiet and me to stand back. I couldn't see anything, but that feeling was still with me. My neighbours I know saw something but refused to tell me what it was since I was 15, and he probably didn't want to scare me. After a few minutes, the feeling of dread was gone, and the sound of something moving through the forest could be heard in the distance. My neighbour lowered his bow and told us we had to leave. We immediately listened, and by the time we got back to the small neighbourhood, the town police had arrived. My neighbour explained the story, and the police advised us to stay inside. They later sent a few animal control people to survey the area to try and get the bear away from the neighbourhood. They came back empty-handed. I never knew what that was out there, and I'd done some research and I believed it might have been a Wendigo by the dead animal killings. My neighbours refused to talk to me about it ever again, and my neighbour who had the bow seemed very cautious after that. If anybody has any insight on this, please say something. This happened a few years ago, and I now live in a different state. So my story starts one day a few years ago. I ask a friend of mine if he wants to go to the local forest with me. It's fairly small, only a few miles long. I've been there 1,000 times growing up, but he's never been. It's all woods, not like a campground or anything, and there's rarely ever anybody there during the day. I pick him up around 5 or 6 and we go. It was tons of fun just walking around and hanging out. It's maybe like 8 now and it's pitch black in the woods. I suggest we leave, so we start walking down the path back to the car, probably a mile away. I don't remember in the moment if it was a small noise, or we both just saw movement. But I looked over to the left and I swear I saw something that shook me to my core. It was a humanoid-looking figure with no legs, was either weirdly clear or see-through, moving fast towards the way we came from, so away from our car. It looked to literally be gliding over things, making zero noise as we watch it go by. We then look back and see a giant bright light down the path towards where the figure was moving, which is weird because there's no roads or anything for miles. I can't imagine why there would be light like that. I've been there late at night when a cop or ranger would be in the parking area, and it looks nothing like it. It was 10 times brighter. I was frozen and terrified. I look over to him praying he saw the same thing, so I whisper, "Did you just see that?" And he looks at me literally uncontrollably shaking, maybe even on the verge of tears, and was like, "Oh my God, what was that? What's that light?" So at that point we just ran. I ran as fast as I could the entire way back to the car and we left. I wanted to make sure we're on the same page on what we saw, and he drew a little sketch, and it looked basically identical to what I saw. It was terrifying, and I 100% believe in ghosts now. I just can't imagine what else it could have been. I saw no legs, and no noise was made. Someone sprinting through the leaves and whatnot would definitely make a noise. It was so quiet in there, you could hear a pin drop. I still to this day have no idea what that was and still get a little shook thinking about it. I tried to get my friend to go back, even during the day, but he absolutely refuses. I had another friend go with me during the day and late at night 2 or 3 times now, but we've never seen anything weird. I've had a few experiences with the supernatural over the years. As I've gotten older, they've lessened in occurrence, and this specific encounter was the last I remember having. This happened around 13 years ago. I'd gotten myself ready for bed and decided that this night I wasn't going to watch TV and attempt to get a good rest. I probably laid in the dark for 20 minutes when I started to feel like I was being watched. I cracked open my eyes and saw the silhouette of a young girl in the corner of my room at the foot of my bed. She looked like she was dressed in quite old clothing, like the kind of dresses that came out a little down the bottom. She also had wavy hair. I didn't feel threatened, but I was so unexpectedly spooked that I leapt out of my bed and switched on my bedroom light. As expected, there was no one there. I walked out and told my mum what I'd seen, and she had ordered me to ask for a name and maybe I'd get an answer in my dream. So after I calmed my nerves, I went back to bed, and before drifting off, I asked her for a name. When I woke up in the morning, all I could think of the name Elizabeth, which is strange considering that's my auntie's name. The next time I visited my auntie, I told her about my experience, and she went on to tell me that it sounded like one of her spirit guides. A young girl that has followed her for as long as she can remember, and usually appears when she's in a really low place. I don't know if it was the same girl, but it's always interesting to think of the possibility that it was. I haven't seen the girl since. I was on a bus from Makassar en route to Taracha, which is a village in Indonesia. I was there to visit family, so some of my cousins were there with me. It was near midnight and like some hours into the trip, where everyone fell asleep. I began to notice this weird humongous blob thing in the woods next to our bus. It was dark, but the lights from the streetlights and the bus's headlights indicated the colour was purple perhaps. The blob was about the same size as the bus through my eyes, if not bigger. The thing was bobbing up and down through the trees, and it was moving crazy fast. And the weirdest part was that every time it bobbed down, some gooish liquid would ooze down into the side of the road. I was so confused with what I saw, so I just woke up my cousin next to me, and I pointed it out, and he saw the exact same thing. He saw the big blob. We watched it together for 2 minutes or so, doing its bobbing movements, and then he went back to sleep. It soon later just disappeared from my view, as if it just became tired of something. I'd say the total amount of time it was there just blobbing up and down next to the bus was about 30 minutes. It's just kind of funny and weird that out of all the crazy unexplained experiences one could have, mine would be a big purple blob. My only rational explanation is that my mind was making shit up, and me being awake late at night could be a factor, but at the same time, that wouldn't explain my cousin seeing the same thing. Another theory is that some fog could have made some type of visual illusion, because there was fog in some places during the trip, but then again, even at the times the fog cleared, I could still see the blob, plus that gooish thing on the ground. This dream will be one to remember for a long time. It felt like I was playing some kind of augmented reality video game, while also occasionally observing events from third person. A group of dream friends and my partner were there with me. I don't remember a lot about the early part of the dream, because the end of it was so vivid and intense. My friends and I decided to initiate the final boss fight of the game. In a third-person perspective, I was able to watch as the final boss collected a group of companions and made selections from a wide range of options for how the coming battle would be. I felt very connected to this final boss, and I was watching it primarily. I came back to my body, and my friends and I got together and headed toward a big central building where a lot of people were busy doing their own activities. We made our way up to a waiting room with a few couches and a large TV. I could see my team preparing for the game on the TV screen. My other teammates had gone to separate rooms. My partner and I were in this room together. Something happened on the screen, and I saw the boss fight sequence failed. It then showed a young man with long dark hair, and he was holding a piece of paper with words printed on it. It looked like it was a kind of computer code or spell. As I read it, I noticed it said my name in the strings of letters at least 5 times, somewhat evenly spaced apart. I looked over at my partner and said, "Hey, look at that. It has my name on it." She didn't look up from her laptop. She just said, I looked back at the TV. The young man there turned his head to me, looking directly at me, and said, "Wake up, Madja." I stared, and his nose started bleeding, and he said it again, more insistently, "Wake up, Madja." It turned into a kind of chant of, "Wake up, Madja, wake up." I'm getting goosebumps as I write this, as it's occurring to me that this was the encrypted message that was on the paper he was holding that had my name on it. I nodded my assent to the figure in the TV in front of me, and he reached out his right hand, clear out to the TV. I reached my right hand out to his hand, and we took each other's hands. He then pulled me clear across the room 10 or 15 feet of the screen, and my body crashed into it. I could feel it draped over the top of the TV. I saw in third-person perspective the TV screen not cover my body. There was the screen that the final boss had been using to initiate the final battle sequence. I was fitting it out, selecting checkboxes and writing in code and text boxes, filling everything out and actually initiating it. I felt a tingling sensation as the dream began to fade, and I woke up.